Historian Niall Ferguson spent years studying the collapse of empires, Rome, the Ottomans, the British Empire, the Habsburgs, and he found one indicator that appeared in every single collapse, without exception. The United States crossed that line. Throughout history, great empires have fallen for different reasons: military defeat, political corruption, climate change, disease. But Niall Ferguson, one of the world's leading historians of empire, noticed something extraordinary. Before every major imperial collapse in history, there was a moment when the cost of servicing past debt exceeded the cost of defending the empire itself. When an empire spends more paying interest on old decisions than protecting its future, something fundamental has broken. And that moment for the United States arrived in 2024. But before we talk about America, let me show you how this pattern has played out over and over again across 3,000 years of history. In the final centuries of the Western Roman Empire, military spending was the lifeblood of the state. The legions maintained borders stretching from Scotland to Mesopotamia. They required constant pay, equipment, food, and supplies. But Rome had a debt problem. Decades of currency debasement, replacing silver coins with bronze, had created a crisis of confidence. Emperors borrowed to pay the army, then borrowed more to pay the interest on the borrowing. By the 4th century AD, Rome was spending more managing its financial obligations than fielding and equipping its armies. The frontier defenses thinned. The barbarian federates, outsiders paid to defend Roman borders, became unreliable. And in 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked Rome. Not because Rome lacked the military tradition to defend itself, but because it had run out of the financial capacity to do so. Rome is not an isolated case. Every major empire Ferguson studied hit the same wall at different times, in different ways, but always with the same outcome. The Ottoman Empire at its peak was one of the most powerful states on earth, controlling territory from North Africa to the Persian Gulf, from the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula, but the Ottomans financed their expansion through debt, particularly after costly wars with Russia and European powers in the 18th and 19th centuries. By Ottoman 1755, the Ottoman Empire was spending more than 50% of its budget on debt service, more than on its army, more than on administration, more than on anything else. In Aten Aydivun, the empire was forced to accept foreign control of its finances. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration, run by European creditors, the empire that had once threatened the gates of Vienna, was now financially supervised by its former enemies. It dissolved completely in 1916-22. The British Empire followed a similar trajectory. Two world wars left Britain with debts exceeding 200% of GDP. By the 1950s, Britain was spending more servicing that debt than maintaining the military machine that had once controlled a quarter of the Earth's surface. The empire didn't fall to a conqueror. It simply became too expensive to maintain. By 1968, Britain had withdrawn militarily from east of Suez. The empire that the sun never set on quietly turned off the lights. Now here's the number that changes everything. In 2040, the United States crossed Ferguson's line for the first time. Interest payments on the national debt exceeded the defense budget. 22% of all federal tax revenue now goes to servicing past debt, more than goes to the military that protects the empire. The United States spends approximately $51 billion per year on defense. It now spends more than that, over $950 billion, just on interest payments, not paying down debt, not reducing the principal, just paying the interest on $39 trillion of accumulated borrowing. And with inflation at 4.6% and the 10-year Treasury yield at 5.1%, those interest payments are growing every year automatically, with no vote required, no legislation needed, just the mathematical consequence of past decisions. Ferguson calls this the moment when an empire's future is mortgaged to its past. The Romans mortgaged their frontier defense to pay for past wars. The Ottomans mortgaged their military to pay European creditors. The British mortgaged their empire to pay for 2 world wars. The Americans are now mortgaging their defense capacity to pay interest on decades of deficit spending. And here's what history tells us happens next. It doesn't happen overnight. Empires don't fall the moment they cross Ferguson's line. They fall in the decade or two that follows, as the financial pressure compounds, as the military capability gradually erodes, as rivals sense weakness and begin to test the boundaries. Rome crossed the line in the 4th century, fell in the 5th. The Ottomans crossed it in the 1870s, dissolved in the 1920s. Britain crossed it in the 1940s, withdrew from empire by the 1960s. America crossed it in 2024. Ferguson's law is not a prophecy. It is a pattern so consistent across so many different empires, cultures, and centuries that its predictive power is almost impossible to dismiss. When debt service exceeds defense spending, the empire has begun choosing its past over its future. Every empire in history has faced this choice, and none of them, not one, has found a way to reverse it without significant decline. 50% of American taxes now go to interest payments. The number is rising. The defense budget is not keeping pace. History is watching. And history has seen this before. Subscribe to Empire Collapse, because the most important number in the world right now isn't the stock market, it isn't GDP. It's the ratio of interest payments to defense spending. And for the first time in American history, that ratio has crossed the line.